In this chapter, we'll look at handling data submitted from multiple choice form fields. We'll see how to deal with the following input types. Radio button groups. These allow the user to select only one value from the group. Checkboxes. These can be used singly or as a group. When used as a group, they allow multiple values to be selected or none at all. Handling a single checkbox requires a slightly different approach from a group, so we'll look at them separately. Select or drop-down menus. Like a radio button group, they allow only one value to be selected. In fact, one value is always selected. And multiple choice lists. These use the same basic HTML markup as a select menu, but allow 0 or more values to be selected. Each example in this chapter uses the same basic feedback form in contact.php and the generic mail processing script in process_mail.php as in the previous chapter. However, the version of process_mail.php in this chapter doesn't actually send an email. If we scroll right down to the bottom on line 67, we can see that mail sent is simply set to true. It doesn't use the mail function. If you want to send an email, please use the version of process_mail.php from the end of chapter 9. And to keep the code in the example files as simple as possible, each video in this chapter deals with the different input types separately. So if I load this into a browser, this one deals with radio buttons, and it's only adding a radio button group to the feedback form. And the video on checkbox groups will add only a checkbox group, and so on. This means you can watch the videos in any order. Radio buttons allow users to choose only one of several options. This set of radio buttons at the bottom of contact.php in the chapter 10.02 folder of the exercise files has three options. Although it's common to set a default value by adding the checked attribute to one of the buttons, it's not obligatory. So if I load this file into a browser, the radio buttons are down at the bottom and no button is selected. And it's only if the user selects one of these options that the radio button group will be included in the post array. If all of the buttons remain deselected, the radio button group will be ignored. So let's switch back to the code to see how to handle a radio button group. All buttons in the same group share the same name attribute. So in this case, the name is gender. And if a button is selected, it's the value of the selected button that's transmitted when the form is submitted. So in this case, we'll be submitting female, male, or won't say if a button has been selected. Let's start by assuming that you don't set a default and that the radio group is not a required field. For the processing script in process_mail.php to be able to handle it, you need to add the name of the radio button group to the expected array. So let's scroll to the top of the page, and the expected array is on line 5, so we need to add a new element to that, which will be gender. That's the name of our radio button group. Because no button has been set as the default, we also need to check whether gender has been included in the post array, and we need to do that before we go to process_mail.php. So let's do that on line 14. We need a conditional statement if not is set, and we're looking for the post array and the gender element. So if it doesn't exist, we'll create it and set it to an empty string. This is necessary because the script in process_mail.php assumes that every input field listed in the expected array will be included in the post array, and if we don't create a default value here, the mail processing script will generate errors. But let's say that a button has been selected, but the form is submitted with errors. So we need to redisplay the form with the correct button selected. So we need to go back down to the radio button group at the bottom of the page, and we need to add a bit of PHP logic in the input tags. So on line 81, just before the closing angle bracket, insert some extra space, and in there we'll have a PHP block. And we need to check if the post array has any elements. So if post, if it has, that means that the form has been submitted. And then we also need to check the value of gender. So we need to compare it with this value here. So that's female. If it is, we need to echo checked. We get this gender variable from the mail processing script. Originally it's post gender, but the mail processing script will convert this into a simpler variable. So that's where gender comes from. We need to do the same in the other radio buttons. So copy those lines of code, and then in the other radio button input elements, just paste that in, and this time we're checking to see if the value is male. And then in the last one, we need to check that the value is won't say. It's got an apostrophe in it, so we need a double quoted string. Let's just copy that and replace this here. So if we save that and then go back to the browser, and I'm going to fill in my name, but I'm going to ignore comments because that's a required field, and my gender is male. Click send comments. We get the error message here, but the value of male has been preserved, so that's working fine. But let's say I want to make the radio group a required field, but I still don't want it to have a default value. So let's go back to the editing program, and at the top here we need to add gender into the required array on line 6. And then we also need to add an error message to the radio button group. So scroll down to the radio button group, and we'll put the error message here in the legend on line 79. So inside there we'll create a PHP block, and in that PHP block we need a conditional statement. So if, I want to see if the missing array has got any elements in it. And we also want to see if gender is in that missing array. So in array, the value that we're looking for, which is gender, and then the array where we're searching for it, that's the missing array. And we'll have a colon at the end there. Then inside the legend, we'll have an HTML span with the class warning, and please select the value. And then after that we need another PHP block, close our conditional statement, end if, followed by a semicolon, and if we save that, go back to the browser, and we need to refresh the page. So we'll do that. I'll add my name, and then ignore everything else, click send comments, and it tells me now please select a value. But if I select a value and submit, then that message goes away. So that's a couple of scenarios, but let's say you want to set a default value. Let's choose rather not say as the default. So go back to the editing program, and it involves just a slight change to a conditional statement. So let's go down to won't say. Here, instead of if post and gender equals won't say, we'll change this to and if not post. So in other words, the form hasn't been submitted, and we change this to or instead of and. So two vertical pipes, and then it will echo checked. So let's just save that, go back to the browser, refresh the page, and rather not say is now selected. But if we try this again, put my name in there, I'll select male, send comments, and it has selected the correct radio button. So that deals with several different scenarios of using radio button groups in this web processing form. And the good thing about it is that all of the code in process_mail.php remains unchanged. That already handles things like multiple choice elements such as radio button groups. Checkboxes can be used either in a group or individually. I've opened contact.php into chapter 10_03 folder of the exercise files. On line 76 there's a standalone checkbox that asks the user to accept terms and conditions. Checkbox groups require different handling, so I'll deal with them in a separate video. In this video we'll look at how to handle a single checkbox that you want to treat as a required field. The name of this checkbox is terms, but the input element doesn't have a value. If you don't set an explicit value for a single checkbox, the value defaults to on if the checkbox is selected. So I think it's a good idea to always have an explicit value. So I'm going to add a value in here, and the value I'll set to agreed. So that this checkbox can be processed by the script in process_mail.php, we need to add it to both the expected and the required arrays. So at the top of the page, let's add terms to the expected array and also to the required array. If the form is submitted without the checkbox being selected, it's not included in the post array. So we need to check if post terms has been set. We need to do that before we go to process_mail.php. So I'm going to add an extra line on line 14, then a conditional statement. If not is set, then we're looking in the post array for terms. So if it hasn't been set, we'll set post terms to an empty string. This is necessary because the script in process_mail.php assumes that the post array will contain all elements listed in the expected array, and setting the value to an empty string will add terms to the missing array if it's a required field. So now we need to go back to the HTML part to handle two particular scenarios. So let's go down. And the first scenario is that the checkbox has been selected, but there are other problems. So we need to show that it has been selected. So inside the input element, just before the closing angle bracket, insert some extra space, and then a PHP block goes in there. And in the PHP block, we need a conditional statement. If post, so in other words, the form has been submitted, and terms is equal to agreed. If it is, we echo checked. This terms variable comes from the mail processing script, which converts the post array into new variables based on the array element key. So post terms becomes simply terms. So that's fixed that. The other scenario is that the checkbox hasn't been selected, so we need to show an error message. So that needs to go inside the label. So add an extra line before the closing label tag, then a PHP block, and inside there, if missing, and in array, we're looking for terms in the missing array. So if it is, we need to add an HTML span with the class warning, and then the message will be please signify acceptance. And then we just need to close that conditional statement there with end if and a semicolon. So let's save that and test this in a browser. So let's agree to the terms and conditions. I'll fill in my name, but I'll ignore comments, which is required. Click that. Got to add any comments, but this has remained selected, so that part is working fine. Let's deselect that and then fill in both my name and some comments, and then send comments. And although both of the required fields have been filled in, because I've not selected this, we're now told please signify acceptance. So that's how to deal with a single checkbox that you want to make a required field. All the code goes in the same file as the form. There's no need to make any changes to process_mail.php.